Hey there, fellow citizens of the internet. Welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast. This is the third time that I'm trying to have this conversation with Asha. And hopefully technology and the gods and the aliens are on our side today. So Asha, welcome again.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here for the third time.
Okay, so you are would you say you're a life coach?
Yeah, I identify now as a healer and a life coach. Yep.
Okay. Just give us a quick synopsis of what entails in being a life coach and a healer, and how did you get on this path? And let's just start with that for now.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with how I got here. So I had over a decade of practicing as an attorney and about 7 to 8 years teaching as a college professor. And in between those two, or along with those two, I was doing business coaching and advising people. And as I was coaching people one-on-one, even if we were talking about strategy, I would notice that there were mindset things that came up. There would be issues of insecurity or lack of confidence, or I've never seen somebody in my family do this. How could I make this amount of money when no one in my family ever had? Like all of these things that come together because of our upbringing that I won't say stop us from getting where we want to go, but might slow us down, because you got to have the belief and the action to match in order to get to where you're going. So I've always been a person that's been curious about why someone does the things that they do, how the brain works, how an experience affects what you do later. And I brought that into coaching, got curious, studied a little bit more about the brain and why people do the things that they do. And eventually I realized that I was more interested in that than I was in business. I'm still interested in business, but I wanted to help people figure themselves out first. And if business became an expression of that, then I was cool with that. More so than I wanted to just help somebody build a business, because not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, but everyone can benefit from healing and coaching to get to whatever their goals are. So that's kind of how the interest and the pivot started. And I ended up making a full switch because I just became so much more interested in it, started learning about Reiki energy and healing, started doing more like intuitive reading things. And I couldn't really make it fit with business for me. And I said, you know what? I'm more interested in this right now. Let me go ahead and explore this and just see who's interested and who I can help along this path as I'm also exploring myself. So that's how I ended up switching.
Okay. Can you let us into your journey into healing a little bit? You don't have to go into in depth or anything like that, but what was the journey of healing for you? And maybe even before you mentioned that, what led you to think that you needed to go through a journey of healing first?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. So I had been to therapy a couple of times in my life. I had a dad who was present, but also left some really strong emotional marks on my experience. And I wanted to make sure, I knew that what I had experienced was not conducive or helpful to building the relationships that I wanted in terms of dating. And so I purposefully went to therapy to try and unpack, okay, what had I experienced? What did I want? And how can I separate the two or bring pieces together to actually get what I want? And therapy was great. It was helpful. Really enjoyed it. And then a few years later, I was running my own business, and there were these confidence issues that would come up. And so I reached out to someone who was a coach for entrepreneurs, mindset coach for entrepreneurs. She was on her own healing path and her own healing journey. And she started sharing with me, doing Reiki healings, doing inner child work, doing timeline techniques, things like that I had never experienced before. And what I realized that I felt like with the intentional healing work, I actually got to go back and reassociate the emotion with some of those traumatic stories that I had experienced, whereas therapy gave me the language to explain what I was feeling and to understand what had happened. I didn't gain the tools to sort of rewire the charge around the incidents. And healing allowed me to go back and rewire the charge, because I would look back at, okay, this particular thing happened. Knowing what I know now, what do I think was actually going on? Can I tell my younger self with the wisdom of today that this is what it was, and that she's okay, and that she's, entitled to these feelings, and that she's safe, and that we're here today, we made it. And when I started doing those kinds of things, it took the charge out of. So when I would be triggered, when I would be reminded of something from the past, I'd go, okay, you're not in that spot anymore. And this is what was happening then. This is what's happening now. Okay, you good? We're good. All right, let's move forward. I didn't learn that in therapy. I learned that through the healing modalities. So that was, I think both can be needed. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think that they're different in that respect. And when I started doing the healing work, I felt like I really started to see progress because I'd already had the language, but I didn't know how to take it. I could just understand, but I didn't know how to change the charge behind some of these things.
Wow. Were you terrified or scared to travel back in time and have, this deep conversations with a younger self, given that it had been, X amount of time since you've been that age, right?
Yeah.
And can you elaborate a little bit more into that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wasn't scared, but I thought it was weird. Now I'm like, yeah, talk to your inner child, talk to your little girl self, talk to your little boy self, and now it just seems much more normal. But I was like, this is really weird. Like, who does this? But one thing that I learned in my neurocoaching certification is that we're always told, like, don't be negative, don't say the negative thoughts, don't think the negative thought. But the reality of it is, if they come up, they're already there in your subconscious. So by the time your brain realizes it, by the time it comes to your subconscious, it's already been playing in the background for a long time. And so it's actually beneficial to give voice to those thoughts, because then you're bringing them up and you can understand what they are. So it took a shift, because I thought, well, we shouldn't go back there. We're not there anymore. People leave the past in the past. But the reality of it was, the past was still very present. I just didn't know. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I recognized it and understood it, then I could go back so that my past was no longer controlling my present or my future. But it's definitely a shift, because we just don't talk about that. Because also it may make you change the relationships that you have with people. It may change the way that you interact with people. And especially if you have some issues with your caregivers and you're still in a relationship with them, like, that's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
But it also helped me realize that my parents are just human, doing the best that they could, just like I'm doing the best that I can. But we all think our parents are supposed to be Superman and Superwoman and, all of that stuff. But when you start to see them as human, you give them a little bit more grace. Doesn't mean that they didn't hurt you or they didn't mess you up, but you're like, okay, I can see the humanity in you, and I can move through this a little bit more easily.
What led me to ask that is because my memories of my childhood for a long time were just wonderful. I would go there for the safe space, right? Because when I remember about my childhood, it's like, wow, this was awesome. I remember doing this, remember doing that. But only if I remembered the good stuff. Right? The minute that anything that closely resembled a not so good thing, I would just bounce out of that memory and then jump onto another memory that validated the happy spot, right? So it became a dark place that I would find comfort in. As in, like, within that dark place, I would just find the really, really high good points, and then just not dig deep, go any deeper than that. So that's what led me to ask you that, like, how is it to travel back in time? So do you see, when you're coaching people, right? Well, so maybe you can first talk about what your experience in being a coach has been. But as you're going through this process with people, are you seeing, one, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about coaching and therapy in general? And two, do you see this hesitancy towards revisiting the childhood?
Yeah. Yes. Definitely yes to the second one. There's definitely a hesitancy, because again, I think it's just not common. And again, there's so much out there about, like, don't go back, don't look back. You're not going that way. All of these phrases that are meant to be helpful. But again, if your past is still controlling your future, you got to go back and look. And some of the biggest misconceptions, I think, probably that you're going to get an overnight fix, and you didn't get where you are overnight. And so don't expect, the changes that you're trying to implement to take place overnight. there's awareness that comes first, and then there's a change in behavior. So it's not this thing that comes packaged together, but one leads to the other. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer than what people think. But I think generally people believe that coaching is really helpful. It's much more common in business. Life coaching has been a thing for a while, but it does take a level of vulnerability to say, hey, I think I need some guidance to help me get to these life goals. But for the most part, everybody I've talked to that's had a life coach or a business coach has been really, really happy with the result, because kind of like therapy in a sense, the person is only working on your behalf. They want what's best for you. And because they're not as emotionally charged, they don't have the same thoughts. Yeah. They're not like stuck in the same thought patterns as you. They don't have the same like emotional history as you. So they can look at a situation more objectively and give their outside thoughts when you're sometimes in the middle of it and can't see because you're in the middle of the situation. So I think it's been very, very helpful from that standpoint.
Okay. Well, so what exactly do you coach on? And maybe most importantly, why? Why did you pick that to be the coach?
Yeah. So the 3 areas that I cover are like personal development, personal goals, work or career goals, and then relationship goals. But from a premise of finding freedom, especially for Black women and women of color, and then people of color in general, there's such a lack of freedom that we often have because we're trying to make it in corporate America, or where we've got the weight of being the only person who looks like us in this space, or the weight of taking care of our families financially, or, so much stuff that is on us that curtails our behavior, sometimes doesn't allow us to be just free people. Like, I want everyone to be free from the expectations that they don't want to carry, so they can live truly in power, light, and love. And so I'm looking at those 3 areas of personal, work and career, and then relationships, to see where people want to get free and then to help them do that. So we take a look at, what are the goals that you want and where are you now? What do you think is stopping you from getting there? And in that process of getting from where you are to where you want to be, that's where the healing work comes in. That's where the undoing and the redoing, the unlearning and the new learning takes place.
So for the sake of specificity, right? Freedom, it's a blanket term, right? So it can mean a lot of things, and so how do you go? Like, what is freedom? Like, what are they? It probably varies from person to person, right? Like my freedom is so that I can be able to travel here, travel there, without having to worry about X, Y, and Z. That's my definition of freedom. For someone else's definition of freedom is I want financial freedom, meaning more specifically, I want to be able to not work and still be able to attain the basic necessities of life that I need. That they would consider that freedom. So can you unpack for me, how do you go about identifying someone's definition of freedom and then walking them through that, achieving that?
Yeah, I ask them. And I like both of those examples of freedom that you gave. I want location freedom. I want time freedom. I want mental freedom, right? I want financial freedom, all of those things. But I let the person decide what area they want to focus on first, and to decide what freedom means for them. I come at it from a perspective of, let's take away the expectations that no longer serve you. So growing up, I had an expectation that I didn't have to be perfect, but I couldn't mess it up, right? I was often the only Black person in the classrooms. I was the only Black person in my neighborhood. My mom was a Black school administrator in the district, and she was the only Black person for a number of years. And so people knew her, and I attended school in the same district. So people knew me, they knew us together. I had to protect her reputation. I had to protect mine, because there weren't enough of us to mess up, right? That carried through. Then I went to law school, where you are responsible for people's cases as you litigate. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of, you can't mess up. You might not need to be perfect, but you certainly can't mess it up. And so I grew up with that expectation. At some point in my 30s, right, I was like, this is a lot. Like, at this point, can I still mess up? But I had this fear of, again, not being perfect. but getting it right enough. And so the freedom that I am working on right now and that I've made a lot of progress on is really that mental freedom to tap in, to figure out what it is that I want to do for me. Not because someone else expects that I should behave this way, not because this is what an attorney is supposed to do, not because this is what a life coach is supposed to do, not because this is what they expect me to do as a daughter, but what is it that I want to do? And then I put that at the center of my decision making, so then I can decide how I want to interact and engage instead of carrying this pressure to do these things that are expected, which may not be in alignment with how I am. And it's a big shift. Actually, if you're recovering people pleaser like me, it's a big shift because you've always taken into consideration other people's opinions and expectations. And rarely do people ask you, what do you want to do? You know, when's the last time someone asked you that, you know?
Yeah. So I might be stepping on your toes here. I don't know, but I'm trying to get to something here, so bear with me.
Okay.
You've had the opportunity to be responsible, right?
Good for you.
But maybe you were responsible for too long, and you did not experience the freedom, right? So now it sounds to me that you're trying to balance freedom and responsibility. So in your line of work, like as you're coaching people, how do you go about helping them find this balance of freedom and responsibility? Because for some, freedom can easily be misconstrued as the lack of responsibility, right? So if you got 3 or 4 kids, you got a full-time job, you get this, you get that, that's a lot of responsibility, yet you're chasing your version of a freedom. But somehow that freedom cannot get in the way of raising your kids, right? For example. So how do you go about balancing freedom and responsibility?
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up. Yeah, freedom doesn't necessarily mean being free from responsibility. I think it's really, I think about it as being in alignment. So there are many different types of work that we can do, right? I'm not someone who can do a job that I don't enjoy, but there are many things that I do enjoy that I could learn how to make money from. And you can give yourself permission to explore, but sometimes, like leaving law, for example, or leaving teaching, those were 2 things that I really wanted to do. And at some point, it just wasn't in alignment anymore. I wanted a different kind of a lifestyle, and I had to give myself permission to leave law behind. I had to give myself permission to leave this tenured job behind and to seek out something that I wanted to do. It didn't mean that I wasn't going to look for money-making opportunities, but it meant that my filter shifted. These are the things that I need to do. Need to provide for myself, want to be able to travel when I want to, X, Y, Z. But I'm going to look for something that I can do that is in alignment with what feels good for me. So it's definitely not about shaking responsibility, but it may be about not taking on more responsibility than what you actually need to, right? And then people often, a friend of mine just was talking the other day, she's in corporate America. She hates it. She's burnt out, but she's like, you know what? The money's good. And the money allows me to send money back home to my family. And if I don't send the money back home to my family, what are they going to do? And I said, let's get on the phone and talk about it, because that's a responsibility that you took on, and you took it on to a very high degree. But what happens? How can you sort of divest from this responsibility? Maybe you'll always send money home, but maybe it won't be as much because you're killing yourself trying to support these folks, which I understand that responsibility, but at what cost, right? Or what other things could you do to make money? If the priority for you is going to be sending a certain amount of money back home, there are many ways that you can make money. Maybe it doesn't have to be in the corporate world where you feel like a little piece of your soul is dying every day for her. So it's about really exploring and just thinking outside the box. That was the expectation, to go to corporate and get that job. What if we take off that expectation and look at what else is possible to meet the goals that you have?
Okay, that's a very, very good example, because from the limited experience that I have with her example of having to send money back home, if that is not kept in check, it comes at a cost of resentment. Right. I'm breaking my back. I'm losing my life here. I'm not living. I'm surviving, but I'm not living. Yes, I'm helping you, but year after year, I'm growing very resentful of you. And you don't even know that, right? So it's
often physically unhealthy. because that kind of stress will manifest in the body. Yeah.
And so that's a very high cost to pay. So internally at the very least. So you touched on this without really touching on it, but I'm gonna throw an umbrella term there, and I want you to unpack this a little bit. And I think it seems like it applies to you. What can you say about the fear of failure? So for me, for example, there was a point in time where I've traveled to LA without the intention of starting a life there or anything like that. But I remember finding myself like not making New Year's resolutions, not doing things like that, because I was like, I don't want to set a standard or to have a goal and then fail at it.
Right.
So because I don't want to fail, I'm just not going to try. But once the fear of failure was removed from this equation, my goodness, I was all over the place. I was trying all kinds of stuff. Failure or success, it didn't matter.
Right.
I wanted to try new things that would give me potential skill sets for my future. So can you touch on the fear of failure and how that plays a role in our lives?
Yeah. So the 3 core needs that everybody has is to feel loved, to feel safe, and to belong. And so oftentimes what happens when we have that fear of failure or fear of something in general, when you ask why enough times, it usually boils down to, I want to feel loved, I want to feel safe, I want to feel belong, but like I belong. So I am making a guess that the fear of failure that you carried was safety, right? If I don't survive in this role, if I don't gain this skill, how am I going to take care of myself, and what does that mean? And I'm guessing that something shifted in you mentally where you knew that you would be okay no matter what happened. And when you can tell yourself, when you can believe that you're going to be okay no matter what happens, then it becomes much easier to take a risk, because failure becomes an experience that you need to get to success, instead of thinking about it as the end all, like I failed and it's terminal. That's it. We can't do anything else. So it comes back to that need for safety.
Okay. So and as you're coaching people through this, how often does that come up? And is it an explicit thing that people are aware of, or you gotta help them work through and until they find that out?
Yeah, it's something that people generally have to work towards, and I might be able to see it, but if I'm telling you that that's what it is, it doesn't resonate as much as if you work through it in your mind and arrive at that conclusion, because then you've sort of witnessed your thoughts, your thought patterns, and you can see, okay, this really what it is, not just because she said it, right? And it comes up a lot. And especially the love, I mean, all 3 of them, the love thing, depending on how you grew up, and was love transactional or was love taken away? And often love gets paired with being cared for. I was working with a client a couple months ago who, she said her parents took care of the basics, but there wasn't like the love. She wasn't encouraged, they put it on the table, but it wasn't this sort of development or this wrapping her in love to tell her that she could do whatever she needed, or, just to hold her and say good job as a kid. And so her relationship with her parents now, and even when other things, business gets tough, when there's a relationship with a friend, there's a little bit of a wall that gets put up when it feels like that love might be taken away, because it takes her back to her childhood of like, yeah, the basics are here, but do they really care? I was cared for, but they didn't care about me. And so those things come up a lot, but it gets covered as in like, I don't know, this person just rubs me the wrong way, or, I didn't get any clients this week, and like, you start freaking out, or you have these emotions, but behind these surface emotions, there's something deeper. And it generally goes back to one of those 3 core needs, emotional needs for people.
Okay. How do you define love? And has that definition changed over time?
That's a good question. I haven't been asked how I define love either in a really long time or maybe ever, because I don't know that I have a thinking really hard.
Okay.
I think in some respect, I think of love as just respect, right? In a general world, I try to act with love first. What does that mean for me? That means that I try to give everybody the respect that I think that they deserve. And even if they have done something crazy, I'm going to still respect you as a human. Doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily let you get close or that I'm going to necessarily, sacrifice myself. That's a different kind of love. But as a general love in this world, I think it's respect, right? Everybody has these basic human rights that I believe that we need to honor and uphold. And that's like, if I see you in the street, I'm going to greet you with respect. If you are disrespectful to me, that has nothing to do with me. That's all about you, but I'm not going to change how I behave or how I share myself with the world because you're not receiving that. So there's love on that level. I think there's also a love, like an interpersonal love or even a personal love that's like caring for, really taking care of yourself. And when you look at babies can't give you anything in return. They just take, right? And often we need to care for ourselves like our parents did or should have cared for us. And I think that's what we call self-love, not just the like, oh, let me go get my nails done or let me buy this thing because I want it. But when you're tired, your parent would put you down for a nap. When you were hungry or hangry or had an attitude, your parents would feed you or your caregivers would feed you. We need to do that kind of stuff for ourselves now. And that's what I think of as self-love, right? Giving love to other people doesn't mean that you would do anything or go to the ends of the earth for them. For some people you might, but I think it's that like giving people what they need, not necessarily what they want. So as a parent, you're not saying yes to everything that your child wants. You're caring for them. And I think you can do that the same thing like in a romantic relationship or in relationships with friends. Someone may ask you for something that you know is going to be detrimental to them. You may love them better by telling them no than by just giving them everything that they want, right? So I think of love as like this general respect, but also this care for people and for yourself to give you what you need, not just what you want. And sometimes that gets warm and fuzzy and sometimes not. You know, I can be very loving to a friend of mine who's an alcoholic, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to supply them with alcohol. It means that I'm going to support them with however I'm able to, you know, on their journey to recovery. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to enable them to cause more harm to themselves. And we get that confused a lot. I think people say, well, if you love me, you would do this for me. Because I love you, I'm not going to do that for you because I don't think that that's what's best.
Right. So it sounds like you would define it, correct me if I'm wrong, you would define it in the sense of you want to protect and foster someone's dignity as a human being first and foremost. Because the human dignity is the thing that they didn't work for. It's there. It is an innate thing. Right. You want to create an environment that fosters the growth of that and the health of that dignity, whether that is your own dignity as a human being or someone else's. Okay, right. I like that. So let's flow a little bit into your cross-cultural experiences here as we come to a close in the next 15 minutes or so. Where have you been? Have you been to places? How has your experience as an African American woman traveling across the world in different places and experiencing other cultures? One, can you describe your very first experience living in the United States or somewhere else? And then we'll expand more on your other experiences later on.
Yeah, my very first experience leaving the United States, I was 20, I think. And I went to Mexico for a language program. And I was super nervous, my first time going abroad. And I'd studied Spanish in school, but like, you know, learning languages in school in the US is shot though. Like you don't learn anything, right? You're just like, whatever, you can do the test, but doesn't mean you can understand people when they speak. And I got there and was like, oh my God, I thought I'd study this and I don't. Someone asked me like, ¿Cómo se llama? Or something like that. And I had heard ¿Cómo te llamas? In school. And I was like, what? And he was like, what's your name? And I was like, oh, that's what you said. Because I just could not pick it up from how he was saying it versus this sterile way that I had learned it in the book. So it was definitely a shock of like, oh, you don't actually know this language at all. But interestingly, I was in this kind of small town that's gotten a lot more popular now. And I was walking around the corner and there was these kids standing outside for school. They were all in uniforms. And this little boy turns and looks and he points and he goes, "Una negrita!" And he just like yelled it at the top of his lungs because apparently he had never seen a Black person or a Black woman before. He was just so shocked that he had to announce it. And I was like, ooh,
yeah,
what? You know, because in the U.S. we're not talking about like, hey, negrita, like you're not, that's a cultural thing that you say in Spanish, Portuguese, right? Whatever. And I was just like, oh my God. Oh, wait, I was looking around. I feel like I'm in danger, but and I wasn't in danger, but it was very much like, oh yeah, you stand out here too. Right.
Right.
But it didn't stop me from traveling. It was an interesting experience. And even today in some parts of Mexico, even Mexico City, when I travel as a Black woman, I'm also tall, I'm 6'1". So, you know, sometimes I stand out. But a couple years ago, I was in Mexico City and this lady was kind of pushing her little girl to stand next to me so she could sneak and take a picture. And I saw what was going on. And it's happened multiple times in Mexico. Like in Mexico, you've seen Black people, right? So there's this experience of sometimes being different. And, you know, fortunately, it's a difference that they're curious about, not like, oh, we don't like that. But there's that experience as well in different parts of the world, which is quite interesting for sure.
Okay. And would you, just for specificity, would you classify that as a negative experience or not good, not bad, it just is?
I would say not good, not bad, it just is. It can be shocking because when you're, I mean, like I stand out here in the U.S. too, but people in the U.S. know that there's Black people here, right? So there's a cultural shock component of it. And if someone is calling attention to you being the Black person there in the United States, that's probably a sign that you might want to get someplace safe. It doesn't have the same connotations or it's not the same in other places. It's shocking, like, you know, because you're used to you, so you would think that everybody else would be used to you. But it doesn't have the same cultural context to it, and so it's not as alarming as if that were to happen in the U.S.
Okay, I think it's like a year and a half ago. My girl and I, we were in a small town in Uganda, southwest side near the Congo, small village, and we're walking around like 6, 7, right before the sun fully sets. And so she really stands out. She's Italian, so she stands out like a sore thumb. And this kid comes out of his house and he starts screaming, "Wazungu, wazungu, wazungu." White people, everywhere. And then this other older kid comes out, he looks, he smacks him upside the head. He's like, "No, that's just one white person." So he squints, he looks again, he's like, "Mozongo, mozongo." So he readjusts his you know, so it's just for her, that was not a good or a bad experience. It just was, right? There was no way animosity. She didn't feel unsafe. It wasn't, you know, anything like that. But it's interesting how that same situation somewhere else might invoke a different emotion, different feeling, even though there was no safety. Her safety was not in question. You know, we were fine. So that's what kind of, you know, led me to ask that question there. So as you started to travel a little bit more throughout the states, I mean not throughout the states, but throughout the world, did your perspective change as a Black person that happens to be an African American? Did that change as you traveled? Yes.
I think that travel has been my single biggest growth tool. And behind that, I think entrepreneurship has been the second biggest growth tool in my life. So I've been fortunate enough to go to 31 countries at this point. I started traveling, like I said, when I was like 20 and just loved it. I loved seeing that there are many ways in this world to do this thing called life. There are people who have more, there are people who have less, there are people who are way happier than folks in the United States. The U.S. is really, really good at selling this American dream and on telling us that we're the best to ever do it and the best that we'll ever do it. And I just don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's true at all. You can see that not just in places like Mexico, but also in Europe. Europe doesn't have this sense of brutal capitalism that we have. There's a lot more community, right? Africa, very communal, right? We look at that from the Western world and go, oh, from the capitalist lens, I would say, and go, oh, that's not good enough. But there are many structures in this world and many people who have found their place in this world and have created beautiful lives without this radical individualism that we have in the US. So traveling opened my mind. It got me to see that there's more than one way to get to a goal. It helped me learn and reprioritize what's really important to me. I think I can like go anywhere in the world and talk to anybody as long as I have a common language to speak. And if I could have one superpower, it would be to be fluent in all languages, because I just love being able to talk to people and hear their stories and things like that. But it has really, really opened me up and made me just cross-culturally conversant, because when I meet people here from another place, I go, oh, I experienced a little bit of that when I was in this place. Now I have something to relate to. And also just by nature, I'm empathetic and just curious about people. And that carries me a long way, because I know that I grew up in a certain structure and system, but because I've seen other structures and systems, I'm able to see sort of where my limitations and where my belief systems are, so that I can get curious about somebody else's. And I've been in lots of conversations, but people don't realize that there's a belief system that they have because they haven't seen anything that's ever come up against it before. And so it's hard to critique it and to make changes.
Asha, I really, really like that. It's like, I think it was like, somebody said this. I forgot who it's not my quote for sure. I think he said like the antidote to dogmatism is cross-cultural experiences. Right? It's really hard to stay dogmatic when you see how different, not good, not bad, how different life is done in other places in the world. Well, before I close here, you said if you could have one superpower, it would be learning all the languages. But unfortunately, we can't really do that. But you can work on a language, right? So I guess the question here is like, are you currently trying to learn a language?
I am, I've already learned a lot of Spanish, so I'm always constantly trying to get better at Spanish, and also Portuguese. Went and spent some time in Brazil to work on my Portuguese a couple of years back, and so I just speak Portuñol because it's all a mix of both of the languages. I used to know a little bit of Haitian Creole, lost a little bit of that, but every time I go to a place, I want to learn a couple words in the language. But right now, I'm most focused on Portuguese. But my friends who are getting married in Mexico, bride is Mexican, her family's all in Mexico. Husband is American. They asked me to officiate their wedding. I said, yeah. And then I said, wait a minute, is it in Spanish? And they're like, well, parts of it. I was like, oh God, like Spanish wedding vocabulary to try to officiate this. I am super excited and honored to be able to do that. So learning languages has definitely expanded my world, and I'm constantly trying, like, what's the word for that in this language? And how would I say that? And using Google Translate, it's something that I will probably not rest until I get to a level of fluency that I think is like actually like, I got this now.
Awesome. That's amazing. When I was a kid, we were not fluent in one particular language. Me and all the kids around, because we were all from like different parts of Africa, and we might have been like 75% fluent in Swahili, a little bit fluent in Kinyarwanda, a little bit fluent in Tonga and this and that. And so when we would play amongst ourselves, it would be a mix of like 6-7 languages. And the parents only understand like a third of what's happening. Right. And it's just crazy salad, like linguistic salad there. Great amusing experience. So any final thoughts as we're coming to a close here? Doesn't have to be about cross-cultural experiences, but about some people's journeys through life and getting maybe more importantly, getting the help that they need in order to achieve the next goal that they have in mind. But if you can weave in some cross-cultural experiences in there, that can be great too.
Yeah. I would say, like, if I could leave people with one piece of advice, I would say stay curious. Be curious and lead with curiosity in everything. When you're experiencing something that's difficult, get curious with yourself, not from a place of judgment and like, why are you doing this? But why is this coming up? Why am I feeling like this? Why is it that I want to do this? Why am I experiencing this block? What does this mean, right? Stay curious. When you meet new people, stay curious, be open, get to know their stories and understand, you know, what they're bringing to the table, what beliefs, what norms are bringing to the table. When you travel, be curious, leave your known way of doing things behind and be open and curious about the world. And I really believe that the folks who end up reaching the goals that they want, do it with a level of curiosity, because then they leave space for themselves to try and fail. And instead of, you know, when it doesn't go their way, instead of going, I guess that's just it, they get curious about why it didn't work. So then they can take that learning forward and try again. And why didn't it work the second time? Okay, but I learned something. Let me take that forward and do it again. So stay curious is my motto. Bring it everywhere with you. You got to make some judgment sometimes. Be curious first before you make that judgment.
I love it. Stay curious. Stay curious. There is that saying of a curiosity killed the cat, but most people don't know the second half of the sentence, which is curiosity. Now, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back.
Oh, I like that. That's better than the cat.
Yeah, Asha, it's been an amazing conversation that I've had with you. I feel like I've learned so much, and hopefully the audience has learned as much as I did in this conversation. Hopefully I can have you on some other time in the future. But thank you so much for coming to the Moses Kabandana Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.